In Russia and Belarus, people are influenced by television to believe that Europe promotes LGBT and that children there are forced to become gay, lesbian or transgender. The propaganda and officials in Russia and Belarus claim that they will not tolerate such things in their countries, since they uphold traditional values. And children should have a mother and a father rather than parent 1 and parent 2. However, living in the system, I can explain what their family values actually entail and lead to. The decriminalization of domestic violence. The law on the decriminalization of assault was signed by Russian President Vladimir Putin on February 7, 2017. According to this law, domestic violence has been shifted from being a criminal offense to administrative violation. Assault on close relatives is considered an offense punishable by a fine of $50 to $300, arrest for 5 to 15 days, or community service. Prior to this law, domestic violence was considered a criminal offense and was punishable by imprisonment for up to 2 years. How did the decriminalization law come about? The bill was introduced to the State Duma by the Supreme Court in December 2015. It proposed classifying assaults as administrative violation in cases of first-time offenses. An exception was made for assaults motivated by hooliganism or based on political, racial, ideological, religious or national hatred. During the second reading of the bill, another point was added, which human rights advocates fought for and which Senator Elena Mizulina was unhappy with. Criminal liability was established for assaults committed against close persons, such as relatives or cohabitants. Mizulina argued that the norms contained in the bill contradict the main goals of state family policy aimed at supporting, strengthening and protecting the family. She saw it as an intrusion into family matters. Afterwards, the decriminalization of domestic violence was added to the bill. Next, I will provide a quote from an interview with organizations that helps victims of domestic violence made by Russian information resource Meduza. Now we find ourselves in a situation where the issue of domestic violence isn't discussed at the state level. It simply isn't on the agenda. As a result, the institutions that are supposed to help victims don't function. Police officers don't understand what domestic violence is, its nature, and how to interact with victims. The same lack of understanding exists among medical personnel in emergency rooms. A woman comes to them and says, "I slipped," and the doctor responds, "Of course." I believe this is destructive, when everyone pretends that this is a minor issue tackled by a narrow group of activists. It's difficult for the broader audience to understand why the woman isn't to blame for the violence, and why violence doesn't necessarily affect only marginalized families or families with addictions. All of this is because people have no source of information about what domestic violence is. It's not discussed on television. Officially, such a problem doesn't exist in Russia. If before an assault could lead to up to 2 years in prison, now the perpetrator can get away with a fine of $50. However, proving that the violence is systematic and comes from someone close to the victim is very difficult. And the victim has to go through numerous complicated procedures. The victim, sometimes teetering between life and death, must realize that the punishment of the offender is solely in her hands. She needs to collect documents and then explain the issue to apathetic police officers. And if everything goes well, the person who assaulted her will pay a fine of $50. Often this money even comes from the shared budget. Essentially, the woman is paying for it herself. And her lawyer must tell her, wait until you are assaulted again. Then, perhaps, criminal liability will be applied. For everyone who has experienced violence, it is demoralizing. However, the changes in legislation have encouraged aggressors. Decriminalization showed them that their actions fit within the framework of the state's conception of family relationships, and that the law is on their side, so they can continue. Why do victims rarely report to the police? It is uncertainly that it will help. Unfortunately, there are cases when calling the police further aggravates the aggressor. We had stories when a woman called the police, they came, took away the aggressor for a couple of hours, then released him. And he returned even angrier, ready to punish the woman. Reporting to the police is embarrassing for some, and for others it's simply dangerous. Police officers themselves believe that they will initiate a case now, and later the woman will withdraw her statement because she changed her mind. Some officers just understand that we don't have a law to hold the offender accountable. Also, the lack of education on this matter plays a role. I think for many police officers it is not a significant problem. They don't perceive domestic violence as something serious to work on, so they aren't particularly eager to address it. Here is a bit of statistics. 2/3 or 66% of all female homicides in Russia from 2011 to 2019 were committed by partners or relatives. These figures come from research by the Consortium of Women's Non-Governmental Organizations. Within the study, human rights activists examined publicly available verdicts on murder, manslaughter in the heat of passion, and fatal beatings. More than 18,500 women's killings were analyzed, revealing that 12,200 of them fell victim to partners or relatives. Directly at the hands of partners, 9,868 women died during the study period, accounting for 53% of all murder verdicts. Russia, according to the research, became a global leader in this aspect. In Europe, the proportion of women killed by partners is 29%, in Africa 38%, and in Oceania 42%. What is the reason for and the source of family violence? The issue is that our society is still closer to patriarchy than equality. And even among young people, many still believe that the man is the head of the family. This mindset is passed from generation to generation. Our society has specific models of how men and women should behave. There is a proactive role for the one who provides for the family, and there is the role of the one who must endure, understand everything, and create a comfortable home. There are still people who believe that in any family conflict or violence, the woman is at fault. If the atmosphere at home worsens, it means she overlooked something or didn't behave well enough. This situation leads to women blaming themselves as victims. They can't objectively assess their relationships. This is changing, but it's changing more slowly than desired. Who are the most common aggressors? It's probably worth talking about men here, because they are obviously more frequent authors of violence than women. The first and main thing that's in common is the belief that women are not fully human, that they need to be told how to behave and can be punished. Such men see violence as a form of discipline and view women as their property. Speaking of personal qualities, it is a patriarchal worldview, where hitting a woman is seen as not a bad sin, since the man is in charge. We also know that often such people themselves were subjected to violence in their childhood. Unfortunately, it is a vicious cycle. If someone is accustomed to violence and perceives it as normal from a young age, they'll carry these attitudes to their families when they grow up. Unfortunately, the system is set up in a way that now it's even harder for victims of domestic violence to change the situation. It's an important topic that needs to be discussed and raise awareness that it's not normal and shouldn't be like this. Unfortunately, many people don't understand this and think that domestic violence is normal. Usually it goes something like this: my father used to beat my mother, so I can beat my wife. No one explains that it shouldn't be like this. The government isn't concerned about this, as seen in such laws. And issues of protecting human rights are not being discussed right now. Human rights organizations that help victims are labeled foreign agents and shut down, because they're trying to fight for human rights, and the government sees this as a threat. This is how our officials protect traditional family values. Unfortunately, this is not the only problem, but I will talk about it in the next video. That's all for today. If you are interested in this topic, please write about it in the comments. Thank you for watching and have a good day!
Don't forget to watch other videos.